to be an entrepreneur is so mentally demanding. It's spiritually, physically. My short week, I started keeping track of my hours. My short week was 72 hours.
I'm pushing all the chips in.
Yep.
To start Creature Comforts felt like an all-in moment, right?
It was an all-in moment. I was 38 years old. I mean, I've had 12 businesses in my life, and I'm including the bicycle repair shop I had when I was 12 years old.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Flow. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. I have known none other than Craig Lambert for a very long time.
A long time.
And we'll talk about how long at some point, but just an amazing guy, a dad, entrepreneur, leader, among other things, very involved in the community. And there's a lot we're going to cover today. And so stay tuned. But this is the Flow Podcast, and welcome.
Thank you, Jordan. What a treasure. I mean, you don't recall, but I think you were 4, when I met you.
Yeah, I don't recall.
Crazy. That. Unbelievable. So thank you for having me on.
So this is an interesting place to start, but I've always known Craig and Donna as, owning Creature Comforts, veterinary resorts and spa, and the whole deal, entrepreneur. And so I want to start kind of where you are right now. We'll get into the business and life before that, but it's like you're really in this space of what I would like to call like almost reinventing yourself, and you're reinventing who you are as a leader, and you're starting new things. And so really just, I'm wondering what it's like to, have been in a business for, you can tell me how many years, I think 14 years,
coming up on 15.
And having this rhythm and having this, I'm running this thing, and I'm, with my wife and I'm the guy, we're the couple running this to now being at this place of just total life change, really is what it is. I would say guessing. And I think the reason I want to say this is because I think with business, with leadership comes a lot of transition, whether it's job to job or trying to leave your job and get into entrepreneurship. So I think I'm just curious, kind of that transition season, like what's that been like?
Yeah, wow, big shock, really. I mean, so the veterinary industry is interesting. We opened in 2008, and we went to the Keys on some kind of a veterinary conference, as our kids always call it, right? And we were on a sunset cruise, and these 2 guys come up and go, "Hey, we'd like to buy your practice." I was like, "Well, we've been open for 6 months, so maybe later." And so there's 52 organizations that are buying veterinary clinics right now. So it's just been this constant battle for the last 14 years. I mean, every entrepreneur eventually wants to sell what they've built, right? And I've just never been emotionally attached to businesses, things, cars, nothing. I can let things go. They're just things, right? And so you're obviously a lot more attached to the business because you dreamt it up, you drew it out on your kitchen table, that kind of thing. But for us, to make that journey to finally partner with someone, it was a tough decision because we would get a letter a week, from organizations that are like, "Hey, we'd like to buy your practice." And we were in a position to be able to do that. We were like, wow, we built it up. It's worth some dollars here. Let's think about this. Let's pray about this. And so I had a good friend who is still a good friend, and we're still working together, who had met 38 of the 52 CEOs of those buying groups. So I felt like I had an insider. So every time I'd get a letter, I would send it to him. So eventually we partnered with these folks because of our desire to hold the legacy, to take care of our employees, to make their lives better. And, as an entrepreneur, when you let go of something like that, the best compliment you can get was about 6 months after we did the deal. Our general manager, they turned my old office into a conference room, and we were sitting in there talking, and she said, you guys have made the very best decision for everybody in the building. So, it's almost like a whew, okay, because that's what we wanted. So I've actually partnered with that company in a bigger level now. I'm consulting for them, opening doggy daycare and boarding facilities around the country. They're just very aggressively focused. They're a private company, so don't worry about trying to buy stock. But they're buying about 40 to 50 clinics a year is some of their goals. So very aggressive, very young, and I'm enjoying watching very young people do incredible things, and it's inspiring to me, you know?
Yeah, and just to paint the picture clearly so people can see, I kind of jumped in head first, but like you guys were a local business in your local community, and a bigger investment firm kind of came in and approached you guys. But even I want to paint the picture too, that like business was booming for you guys. Like everything from a standpoint of, you know, you tell me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like everything was booming.
No, I mean,
it wasn't
you know,
the time like
wow.
we need to sell because we're struggling, you know?
Yeah, every friendship is perfect, every marriage is perfect, and every business is perfect, right?
Exactly.
But no, it was growing. I mean, we were, golly, for the first 6 years, we averaged over 100 new clients a month. I mean, it was just out of control. And, you know, we're cash strapping that, bootstrapping that, and just trying to come up with capital where we can. And I didn't even have a line of credit, man. You know,
100 new clients a month.
A month, yeah. And
That's
we still,
insane.
I mean, a good veterinary clinic, you'll get an email and be like, we'll help you add 10 clients to your, you know, books this month. I'm like, we had 47 last month. I mean, I haven't even looked in a while. It's way more than that because of COVID. Now, does everybody stay? Of course, you know, and you do your best to try to accommodate it, you know. So, I mean, that's the deal. You know, you're going to work your way into a business and ultimately try to find a strategy that is going to be best for your family and best for the business. I've worked 100 hours a week for myself for no pay. I've worked 100 hours a week for other people. I've worked many, many jobs. I would work 100 hours a week for myself for no pay any day of the week, and I would do it again if I had to. But that's what it takes, you know.
When you said a lot of you said every, but I would say I agree. Most entrepreneurs want to sell their business. Why would you say that?
I mean, I think there has to be an exit strategy. You know, to be an entrepreneur is so mentally demanding. It's spiritually, physically. I was on a board, and I had to resign about in the first year in, and I said to them, I said, my short week, I started keeping track of my hours. My short week was 72 hours. I mean, how do you have a life outside of that? You know, I mean, you're there 18, 19 hours a day. Unbelievable. Thankfully, I only lived a few miles away, so I could at least go home and shower. But that's what was required, and that's what an entrepreneur does. You know, you just pound the pavement, man. You just grind and grind and grind, and there can be some detriment. But about 2 years in, I called everybody together. I hired a general manager, and I said, you know what? I'm not missing any more stuff. And I'll tell you what happened. I was actually
family stuff.
Yeah, family stuff. I'm having breakfast with my wife. I'm taking my children to school. I'm not missing any more baseball games. I wasn't even thinking about this on the podcast, but my son, whom you know quite well, he was 13 at the time. So right when I'm making this transition, I mean, I'm moving up in the corporate world and doing very well, having a lot of success. I was in Las Vegas at an oil show. I mean, they put on a pretty good show. And I'm standing there eating sushi, and one of the guys that coached my son for 7 years with me, I was always the assistant coach because I could never be there all the time. I mean, I was flying 100 times a year, 200 times a year. You know,
For your first job?
This was my last job.
Yeah, your last job.
Yeah.
Before
My first job
Conference.
was, man. I mean, at 53, I've been all over the place. I've done it all. You know, I could go through some of that with you, but I was standing there, and he called. And I said, hey, Coach, what's going on? He said, man, we got rained out. And I said, oh, that's too bad. He said, but, your wife dropped Dalton off with me, and she had to go to Maddie's softball game. And he said, but your boy, he hit a grand slam. And I said, like in the park or like over the fence? I mean, he'd hit home runs before over the fence, but he said, no, man, he cleaned the bases, dude. It was unbelievable. And his mom wasn't there because she was taking care of Maddie, right, at the softball. No family representation at all, and the kid jacks a grand slam. I don't know about you. How many people listening to this podcast have hit a grand slam? I played 11 years of baseball, and I could hit home runs, but I never hit a grand slam. I mean, it's a pretty magical thing. So I said, Coach, put him on. And here he was, this young guy. And you know his spirit, man. He's just got such a great spirit. Mm-hmm. And I said, dude, did you hit a grand slam? And he said, I did, Dad. It was awesome. And I said, buddy, I am so sorry I was not there to see that. And he just totally let me off the hook, man. He didn't even hesitate. He said, hey, Dad. He said, we got to eat. And, man, it was so powerful because at that time, Donna was homeschooling them, and I know you guys went through that season as well. And, what a sacrifice. You travel the country and people are like, your wife's a doctor and she doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And I would say, oh, she works a lot harder than I do for no pay. And, but, somebody has to plow the field, man, and plant and reap and you have to eat. But when he said that to me, wow, how powerful was that? So I threw that plate of sushi in the trash and I kind of dug my heels in and I said, that's it. I am going to be self-employed very quickly.
I love that. It's an incredible story. So talk to me about what were you doing at the time job-wise, and what was that experience like, and then kind of transitioning into creature comforts?
So gosh, man, we could probably do several podcasts on all the things I've chased down, but so I had a mobile car washing business in college. It was the first of its kind. So I would go and I got the contract to clean all the University of Georgia's athletic vans, those 15 passenger vans, and those athletes had zero desire to see them clean in any manner by the time I got them. And I'm just humping it, man. I'm working 3 jobs in school and working 30 hours a weekend at back home. And I've just done everything. I've worked for entrepreneurs. I've been around entrepreneurs. I've had uncles who are entrepreneurs. I mean, I've just watched people do a lot of things with very little, quote, education, but just determination. Mm-hmm. I think grit is a big part of it, right? It's just refusing to quit. So for me, I had that mobile car wash business, did quite well. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to own a car wash. So I came to Greenville, South Carolina, but I was an internal auditor for Walmart Vision Center right out of college, okay? Not an accounting major at all, but the director of loss prevention was like, hey, I can teach you everything you need to know. So I was traveling around the Southeast, and Donna was graduating vet school, and she said, let's move to the Carolinas. Okay, fine. She gets a job in Landrum. Unbeknownst to me, I was doing so well. The president of that company at the time had made changes that I was going to be the internal trainer based out of corporate. So it would be a good promotion. But I had already talked to my boss and said, look, we're moving to the Carolinas. Do you care? He said, I don't care where you live as long as you're close to an airport. You know, you can get on the interstate. So we had signed an agreement to move here, got an apartment and everything, and then he calls me and says, hey, the president's made some shifts, man. We went in his office, and the president's like, hey, this is what we're going to do. And I'm like, I'm leaving, like in a week. I mean, he knows this. I'm moving. I came to South Carolina unemployed. So, wow, how does that work, right? So I had to resign. So I come up here, I'm starting to look around. A buddy of mine was a body shop guy, and he's like, you ought to sell cars. You'd be really good at it. And I was like, well, you know what? I need to do something. So I went to the local Chevy dealership. Hey, I might be here a week. I might be here a month, but I'll sell them. So I sold 9.5 cars in 20 days. It was a Joseph moment for me. My wife knows all about it, but I was being pursued at that place of employment in an aggressive way, and I literally just quit on the spot, and everybody there knew why. So what happened was I went to Nick's Car Wash, right here on Haywood Road and all his. So I found Nick, and I heard about Nick, and I went and met with him, and I said, I want to buy one of your car washes. And he was like, you got $40,000? And I was like, no, might owe that much. And he said, well, until you have $40,000, that's 2 months operating expenses for my smallest wash. So until then, you can't own it. But why don't you run the biggest one for me and see if you even like it? So I ran the one on Haywood Road for 13 months, went through over 300 employees, took it from $1 million to $1.6 million. Number one lube shop in the nation. They all got sent to Hawaii. Donna had gotten pregnant with Dalton during this time, so I wasn't going to go to Hawaii without her. But saw the potential there, but also met the CEO of a company that I worked for here. It's a manufacturing company, and they manufacture every kind of electronic and mechanical lock you can imagine. And he would bring his car through almost every week, and we just began to talk, and I worked for them for 13 years. I mean, a very successful American manufacturer right here in Malden. They taught me cost structure and ways of manufacturing. I mean, you can go out to the fifth decimal place on cost, and you have to assign labor to every single thing that's done, and they made money. I mean, they automated and made money in America, and it was a great experience for me. And I had some incredible times. I could write several books on that, but
that was a lot of your travel too.
That's when I traveled all the time. I mean, I was traveling all over North America then, and that's when the home run, the Grand Slam happened. But that was the final straw, man. So I began to aggressively work towards changing all of that as quickly as I could. But that's what I was doing. So that's kind of about a 4-hour story, but I just set it up for you.
I wanted to ask too, I love that. I wanted to ask, like, with the, that moment of, all right, with Dalton's game, I've got to make a change. Like, where did that, I think I remember from us talking, that was kind of like, I'm pushing all the chips in.
Yep.
To start Creature Comforts felt like an all-in moment, right?
It was an all-in moment. I was 38 years old. I mean, I've had 12 businesses in my life, and I'm including the bicycle repair shop I had when I was 12 years old, I mean, because it was a real deal for me. Mm-hmm. And so this was the one, though, that was going to be like, wow, this is it. So at that moment, we were trying to buy commercial property. Let me back up for one second, Jordan, because this is critical to where I'm able to sit today. In 1998, I wrote my first family plan. It was a 5-year plan. And it was a book. Everything I do, man, there's nothing new under the sun. I can sit in business circles and they'll throw a question at me and I'll come up with something. They're like, wow, that's really good. I said, yeah, I think that's in good to great. I don't know. It's in something, Yeah. So there's nothing new under the sun, right? You just read and study and listen, and that's what I do. So I wrote my first family plan, and of course there were 5 areas to that: the spiritual, relational, educational, physical, and recreational. And, there might be 6 or 7 things underneath there. So I kept it in my Bible, and I would open it up and I would circle things that needed to get busy on. I might make a note. One of them was to be self-employed in 5 years. So that would have been 2003. So during this time is when all that happened with Dalton and the Grand Slam. And in 2008 is when we opened. So it was exactly 10 years after writing the first family plan that I became self-employed with a 5-year goal to do it twice, right? Mm-hmm. So after I wrote that plan, you would be shocked if you will write it down clearly, as Habakkuk tells us, and make it plain for those who read it to run with it. To have that format in my life, like what do I want to do educationally, recreationally, physically, spiritually, and financially? What do I want to do? It just kind of all came true. Unbelievable. Now, without that, I mean, you're just kind of waffling. There's an old saying, prioritize your life or somebody else will. And I think a lot of people, I'm guilty of it. You just don't have any priorities. You don't have any goals. You don't have anything to look forward to. And you get stuck there. So I think in one of the coolest stories about that whole thing, when you said you're all in, let me explain to you how all in we were. The property that we currently have, we made an offer on it in 2005. I was going to buy it and start the business. Well, they came back and said, no, it's not enough money. By the way, Cracker Barrel's going to buy it. I mean, you've been there many times. You're a great client. That porch is 100 feet wide and 10 feet deep. And I remember walking out on that porch like, man, I hope Cracker Barrel does build here. I love me some Cracker Barrel, So 3 years later, things were quite different. The economy was tanking, the whole thing. And we came back, and everybody in my life was like, that's your property, that's your property. I'm like, we already tried. Let's go try again. So we contacted them, offered them less money, and said, we want to do this. So one of the coolest God stories of my life right here. So Sean Rogers. Mm-hmm. All right. Sean was the vice president of small business banking. Now he's a pastor and the athletic director at Spartanburg Christian and teaching, and he's just so involved. So great friend, a lot of mission trips. Your parents went on some of those with us. I called him and I said, look, these guys want to close on this property by the end of February. I mean, this is February, the shortest month of the year. We got to close on a commercial property. Is it even possible? Because I'm going to be out a lot of money. Because the guy was like, look, we'll do it, but you got to close by the end of this month. And if you don't make it, you're done. Okay. And Sean said, well, look, barring a Love Canal, which I wouldn't expect you to know Love Canal, but it's an old business story where they had tainted soil and the property was worthless kind of thing. He said, we'll take an environmental study and make sure that's clear. I think we can do it. So did all the paperwork. Man, let's roll. And I'm traveling, and I was actually back in town. And
still working for
the other company, honoring their time. By the way, I had my own laptop, my own cell phone. I tried to honor everything I did with them, through that. So he calls me at 4:30 on February the 28th, and he says, dude, it's not going to happen. And I'm like, what are you talking about, man? How is that possible? I mean, we're pre-approved. Everything's done. He said, man, so-and-so went on vacation. I swear this pile of paper sat for about a week. He said, I cannot get this done in 30 minutes. And I said, I want everybody on the phone. I mean, everybody. We had lawyers in Columbia, brokers. There was probably 8 or 9 people. And there's email evidence of this as well, but not to mention the physical evidence of people who were there. And we get everybody on the phone. And I said, listen. And the Holy Spirit said, shut up. I mean, he knows me really well. Craig, peace, be still is not really going to work for me. He said, shut up. Wow. And I just shut up, man. What was that pause? 3 seconds. I just shut up. Now, in business, the old saying is he who speaks first loses, right? So you make your presentation and you shut up. But I sat there, man, and I just sat there. I didn't know what to say or what to do. I just sat there, and everybody's like, and the broker speaks up, and he says, you're out of time. And this came out of my mouth. I said, no, I am not. He said, yes, you are. And I said, this is a leap year. That came out of my mouth.
Whoa.
And my frown turned upside down. I had never thought about leap year in my life. Ever. Never knew anybody born on leap year. Never thought about leap year. Bro, we signed a contract that said it had to be done by the end of February, not February 28th. And I mean, he actually, he was just like, I'll be dang. He said, you got one more day. And man, I hung up that phone, and I just couldn't believe it, man. I just started shouting, and I was actually out at my car at work, and I just called my wife, and I said, if you want to hear a story. So I didn't make another phone call, and Sean called me at 4:30 on February the 29th with an end of February deadline and said, everything's done. And I said, if you don't think we're not supposed to move forward, how do you, I just call that like Acts chapter 14,672,467,000, I mean, he's always concerned, he's always working, and we just have to be obedient enough to do it,
Mm-hmm. And to even that moment, you worked in the natural, you prayed, you set the goals, you did all the things right. But it was, even with that, what I'm thinking is like, you were still needing God even at that last moment of like,
oh yeah,
oh my gosh, I've done all the right things. I've been obedient. I've prayed. I've followed the Spirit's voice. But now I'm like, there's still that last leg where I'm like reaching, and I think sometimes you just, there's moments where I think on a small scale where I've felt like there's little things on a platter, and it's like, here it is. But you still have to pick it up. You still have to take the risk. You still have to, and I think on those, it's like, it's one of those you can't afford to do it, but you can't afford not to do it moments.
That's right.
And
especially, I mean, I've heard people say this, God shows up where he's going to be glorified. He's going to show up where he knows that he's going to receive the glory. In that particular moment, there was no other way that was going to happen. I wouldn't have read the contract. End of February. The whole thing was just like hey, you guys watch this. This is pretty cool right here.
Yeah.
This is about to go down, and then you take it a step further. We closed on the property. Here we are, we're doing all this stuff. There's Dalton again there. and they're working like dogs. I mean, we're working them all that free labor we could get from those kids, right? We're cutting trees and doing stuff, and he's out in the yard, and he's a lot more practical than I am. And he said, "Dad, are we going to be good? I mean, are you going to quit your job?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, man, I am. I mean, about a month after we open, I'm going to resign, and I've got to, son. We're all in here." And he's like, "Well, I mean, you got a good job. I mean, we have a good life, And he said, I mean, could we lose our house? And I said, actually, we could. I mean, I said, we've invested a lot into this. And he just goes, "Well, Dad," and I saw him spinning out of control, and I just grabbed him, and I could still look down at him then almost, And he said, and I said, "Son, it's okay." I said, "We're already successful." And he said, "How can we be successful? We haven't even opened yet." Yeah. And I said, "Because success in the kingdom is defined by obedience." And I said, "And we're just doing what we've been obediently told to do. And that's it. The results are up to him. This business may fail, but I promise you, man, we will land on our feet and we will do whatever we have to do to get where we need to be." And he still recalls that conversation. And it was one that really spoke faith into my life as well,
This question is in my notes, but I'm just curious now that we're here. It's like, how do you, because you've, like Paul said, I've learned to be content with a little and content with a lot. Like, how do you view daily provision, and like, what has that meant through all these seasons of that? Like, because I think sometimes I get a little bit of a skewed view where I'm like, daily provision is like me getting everything I want and me having excess. And then I think there's moments where I realize like that provision may not be exactly what I think it is,
No, that's great, man. I think once you reach a point in your life where daily provision doesn't become one of your bigger concerns, because there's been many points in my life where even after starting the business where I thought, "I'm not going to be around next month. That's it. It's been a fun run." But yeah, I mean, just kind of out of options. We're not going to make payroll, and it's just, wow. I mean, I must really suck at this, And I think once you get past those moments, it's more difficult to give God the credit and the glory. You have to be a lot more deliberate in your intentions. And so what I have discovered is it's when I serve other people. It's when I met with a fresh, new, first-time entrepreneur yesterday. She wants to start a business. And it just breathes life into me because I can tell her, wow. And you have to be careful, because what you'll find out is past the daily provision, once you get past that and your pantry's full and you're able to give and you're overflowing, you're learning new things and you're giving away, you can quickly turn into a situation like with her where you know all the roadblocks too. But the power in business is the rookie syndrome. Again, another book that I've read, but the guy talked about it, that when you let's say you get and I'm a University of Georgia grad, so you get a scholarship to be the running back at Georgia. Well, they're known for their running backs. I'm going to be the best running back that this place has ever seen. I'm going to break every record. Nothing's safe with me, That's the rookie syndrome. And when you can hang on to that, that's where the success comes,
Anything's possible.
Anything's possible, man. I'm telling you, this is what we're doing. So when you hang around younger people who are hungry and desirous, it invigorates me, So to sit there with her, I have to quench all of the negatives that I know are coming her way, right? And you're laughing because you understand that. And I have to say, yeah, man, here's what you got to do. This. I'll give her 5 things. Here's 5 things that you can do, and then let's get back together. And it's just cool. So I think the daily provision side for me is giving back to other people. Speaking into other people's lives and trying to be obedient in that way.
That's good. I told someone the other day, I said, I have a few, you're one of them, but I get around some people that have been around the block a few times, and especially when they're of the same spirit, it's like, I think there's a lot of views of mentorship, apprenticeship, all the things, role models, but I think the biggest one is, especially when you're like visionary and you feel like people don't understand you, and it's like, you get around somebody that's a little bit ahead of you, and I think it just gives you permission to be who you are. So I think really when you're sitting with her, you're encouraging and speaking into, I think, what a lot of people are looking at her with skepticism and saying, you want to do what? You want, so I don't know, whether she's going to make the jump or be side hustle, all that. But I think when you are making those leaps of faith, you don't exactly always have a cheering section.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think when you meet those, specifically in entrepreneurship, leadership, people that have, you know, gone across a few mountains and been in a few valleys, they really are able, they may not see your whole vision, but I think they just speak into like, yes, what you're seeing is correct. And like, that's a father's heart to say like, I'm just going to encourage you and give you 5 tips. I'm not going to tell you about tax season.
Watch out. There's 72 taxes coming your way. Yeah, those are scary things. And you can talk about them at a macro level. I've got a great story for exactly what you're saying to confirm it. I mean, during this process, one of my pastors, I mean, he's been my pastor forever at the time. And he said to me, he goes, hey, you're not quitting your job, are you? I was like, yeah, I am. Man, dude, you're 38. You got 3 kids. I mean, why would you quit your job? And he's like, you can't quit your job, Craig. You've got a great job. You've got a great career. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? I said, and I respect you and I appreciate you so much. I said, but you're operating out of fear and I'm operating out of faith. And I said, in all fairness, that's what the Lord has shown me through this process is the people that love you the most oftentimes just operate out of fear to try to protect you from harm.
Risk management.
Yeah, risk management. And as a parent, it's difficult to let your kids jump down a flight of stairs, you know? And so when you're a pastor and a shepherd, you want to protect everybody. Hey, wow, I don't want to see you hurt. I mean, we went against every Dave Ramsey principle out there. We followed him to get out of debt and be able to start the business. And then we were like, sorry, Dave, we're out of here, you know? And so I didn't even listen to him for like a year after we started because I'm like, I did this to myself. But
that's an interesting place because I wanted to get into that. So
yeah.
You could briefly speak into getting out of debt because I think that's where a lot of people are, including myself in some areas. But it's like then the idea of debt and business, borrowing, investors, you know, there's a lot there that there's some kind of varying topics, and I don't expect you to be the full authority on that, but I would love to hear kind of your journey in that topic as well.
Yeah, man. Wow. So
everybody clenches up.
You already know we leveraged everything to start in 2008. So I mean, I know what it's like to leverage everything. You know, if you
like basically everything.
Literally at one point everything, because about a year and a half into it, we needed more cash. I mean, I was hurting for cash, and cash is king. Growth will kill you as fast as no customers coming in the door. I mean, when you got a flood of customers coming in, you need a flood of cash, and you're hiring people left and right. It went from 7 employees to 34. I mean, you know, pretty quickly. I mean, you know, hung around at 25 for a while, and then, so I mean, you got to bring in people, and of course, your number one expense is your people, and also your greatest asset is your people. So you want to take care of them. So for me, at that point, I can speak that into somebody to say, hey, I know what it's like. I can do that. I haven't read about it, haven't studied it in business like a business professor too often has. You know, it's not some kind of, haven't pontificated it. You know, I mean, I've done it. You know, and those are powerful. So I know what debt feels. I know what it means to be that the borrower is slave to the lender. Those auto drafts are painful, and should not be taken on lightly. But, you know, I have friends, they'll go borrow $2 million tomorrow and leverage that and make $3 million, you know, and they just don't sweat it. You know, me, there's just been an aversion to debt since Donna and I graduated with student loan debt. We bought cars. We did all the stupid things you could possibly do when we got out of college. The only thing stupid we didn't do was we held to our family budget of $80,000 for our first house. And guess what? The first person that tried to sell us a house wanted us, oh, y'all qualify for a $250,000 home. And I looked at her and I said, I bet we do, but our budget's $80,000. Are you interested in this business or not? I mean, yes, I am. So our first house was $82,500. So we didn't make that house poor decision, and that's probably what saved us. So we began to climb out of all that debt mess, right? And doing the Dave Ramsey thing. We had the leather binder. We had the envelopes, you know, and the kids got to do that. You know, we made them pay for half of their first car, doubled their money. I mean, our kids have grown up in a completely transparent way. One of the most powerful things I think I did for them for their life financially, besides making them pay for half of their first car, was They were probably about 12 or 13. I went to the bank and I got a month's worth of operating income for our household. Now, we had 3 kids in private school by then, so there's a lot of $100 bills in that, and I gave them this stack of money in 20s, 50s, and 100s. I said, I want you to break this out into piles of 100. Well, man, they're like, dude, we're rich. I mean, I've never seen this much money in my life, kind of thing. So they fill up the kitchen table with stacks of hundreds, and I began to go through our budget. I'm like, here's our budget. Let's see. Pick up 3 stacks of those for the power bill. Let's see. Pick up a lot of stacks for private school. Pick up the mortgage, and at the end of it, there's no money left on the table. And I looked at him and I said, that is what it takes to live in this house for 1 month. Choose wisely, And I said, you don't have to make a lot if you don't owe a lot. If you don't have 14 stacks going towards your mortgage, you can do a lot of money a lot of things with 14 stacks. So you don't have to make a lot if you don't owe a lot. So our kids have graciously accepted that challenge and have made unbelievable financial decisions in their life. So that, to me, regardless of where I'm at, I just take so much incredible joy in watching them do that. I mean, Maddie and her husband owned their first home before they were 23 years old because they bought a very cheap home and fixed it up. They were debt-free at 23 with a home.
It's amazing.
Dude, how many people can say that? I told him, I said, you are decades ahead of us, bro. I mean, you are going to be wealthy beyond your wildest dreams if you just keep steady. That's all it takes. So for me, once we got out of debt, and we did this merger, this partnership as we call it, we still own a significant portion of the business. The first opportunity that came my way, Jordan, was to buy a building in downtown Spartanburg. And it just so happens that I have to look at that building every day outside of my office window. I did not know that was the building they were talking about, but I trust this guy implicitly. He says, I've got a deal. I got the sweat equity. I need 6 investors, and we're going to get this thing, and we've got this many tenants. And I go see the whole presentation. I'm like, you know what? I mean, it sounds to me like you want me to be, a sixth responsible for a lot of debt. And I said, that's just not who I am and not what we're going to do, but I'll take it home and I'll talk to Donna about it. She doesn't really get involved in any of that stuff, Jordan, but I said, look, here's the deal. I mean, we're going to invest this much. In 6 years, we're predicting we'll get this much. And she said, but that sounds like we're going to be responsible for some of that debt. And I said, that's exactly right. And she said, that's not who we are. And I said, you're exactly right. And it was painful for me to tell him no. I said, please do not forget about me, though. But I'm not going into debt for another investment. Now, that's not the case for a lot of people. Like I said, I'm not condemning anybody. That's just our personal journey. I've been there before. As far as I'm concerned, I will not be there again. I will use other people's money, other people's leverage. I'll do the sweat equity, whatever is required. Me and this same guy are doing another deal right now that's going to be one of the biggest deals we've ever done. Or I have. I mean, he's done a lot of big deals.
And the only reason you found out about the first deal is because you ran into him. Wasn't even
exactly. And I've known him forever, but
me as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah, exactly.
Definitely a good. That's a great example because it's someone you're in a relationship with who is very successful. I know him. It's a great opportunity, but it just wasn't the yes for you.
That's right.
That's a hard thing.
And that's okay. But it's difficult. It was harder on, he actually sent me like the cry emoji, like, oh man, I want you in on this. And I'm like, you know what, dude,
so what made you say yes on this one without
because
details?
I won't have to go into debt. Yeah. So I'm going to leverage some other things, some other assets that I have that I'm willing to risk. So I know I can get my money back out of it. So that's part of the journey, So trying to be obedient and faithful and, it's tough, man. It's really tough. I mean, especially when a great opportunity comes before you. Yeah, this will probably work. And then you look at the economy, and I just try not to let who's in the White House or who isn't in the White House, or I try not to let all that influence me. It's very difficult not to do. But I always just say, man, we have our own plan. we're going in a direction that we're going. And I think Rush Limbaugh said it. There's a population of people who refuse to participate in a recession because they don't have to. I mean, it just, if things slow down, they don't worry about it because they've made their money and they're doing okay. And, you know, I'm not saying that's where I am. I'm saying that's where a lot of people are, and it doesn't impact them. I'm trying to have that mentality now to where I don't really care what they do. I know what I can do and what I'm supposed to be doing, you know.
It's really good. When you were talking about cash flow, I was very curious about that because I think when I was, you know, a business owner, it's just me, it's a side hustle, you're not really thinking about cash flow, but it kind of, you know, from recent books we've even read here as a team together was like, cash is king, cash flow is everything in some scenarios. And so how does a newer or even, you know, growing business, is there any thoughts on how they are able to maintain that? I know we could go super technical, but just from like mindsets or, you know, you mentioned some, but.
Yeah, I mean, look, people that I consult with, you know, my consulting business, you know, and people that I've just consulted with as friends. I remember I had a rental property and the guy was a landscape guy and he had got behind on some rent and stuff. And, but he came to me and we were talking about everything. And he said, man, I just want to do hardscapes, man, and cut grass. I mean, and I said, yeah, but the financial side is so critical. It's just so critical. So you either hire the talent or you have the talent, right? So the way to establish cash flow is to have a good bookkeeper and have a budget. I mean, it's no different than your home life. I mean, if every dollar doesn't have a name, I promise you it's going to fly away and you're going to have no idea what happened. And believe me, I've had great discipline in budgeting in my life, and I've had incredibly terrible discipline in budgeting in my life. And you know, those are tough things, man. You're constantly learning, and like we've said with Dave Ramsey, it's stupid tax. I've paid a lot of it. But I would say to a small business, I never had a line of credit in this one. I mean, I had a couple of credit cards that one had pretty much an unlimited amount on it because I'd had it for 20 years and put a ton of money on it when I traveled corporately. So, I mean, I could leverage money, but I purposefully did not go after a line of credit. And I regretted that many, many times. Those are those moments where you're like, I should probably have a line of credit, but I couldn't get a release for it. I filled out the paperwork probably 4 times, you know, and then
you couldn't feel like peace about moving forward.
I just couldn't feel peace about it. Like getting $100,000 and you know, what are you going to do? $200,000. What are you going to do? Is it going to be a triple signature? I mean, you need some accountability with that. You know, next thing you know, I just think sometimes when it gets tough, that's an easy fallback, you know?
So what's the alternative?
Oh, gosh, man. I told this young lady yesterday, I said I would have, before I started the business, I would have 6 months more cash than I predicted. I would take whatever I thought I needed and add 6 months cash to it. And I would never begrudge a small beginning. At her age, she's got nothing to lose. I mean, do it. How bad can it be, right? You're not going to take on a bunch of debt. You can make this happen. If you're going to leverage things like I did, and like I said, if you're going to borrow $1 million, as I've shared in that story before, you better have the assets to back it up or a way to pay it back. It doesn't matter who you know. Just because I knew the vice president of small business banking doesn't mean like, yeah, he's good for it. You know what I mean? You've got to have everything lined up that says, you know, so I think that's, you know, every time I see a little restaurant pop up, may be the best hot dog in town, but man, if you don't have 6 months of cash, you're putting yourself in a rough spot.
This is an interesting question that I kept thinking of as you were talking, and of course you'll have to kind of estimate, but how many times over, you know, the years have you had that thought of like, oh my gosh, are we going to make it? Oh my gosh, and push back. I just think if I were guessing, I'd say, man, Craig's probably felt that 2 times, 3 times, you know?
Wow. I can remember we probably had not been open 6 months and we were just growing so fast. We had over 400 people at our open house. This was before really the internet was a big deal to try to get that kind of word out. You know, I took out a full page ad in the newspaper. I mean, how different is marketing now, you know, in 2022, right? I did some radio spots and different things. I mean, we were packed. I mean, just packed. People parking across the street. I mean, they just overwhelmed us, you know. And I can remember, gosh, tell me your question again. I've lost it.
You're good. So the question was, how many times have you
Oh,
gotten to
yes,
that
yes.
place where I don't know if I'm going to make it? Because I think people would be surprised by that. Because if they were going to go into business, they might think, oh, I might get in that tough spot 1 or 2 times. You know?
Well, so in my case, being the financial guy, right, I can remember during that time, that explosive growth that Donna came to me and said, Dalton, he needs a new bat. And this was like fall ball, I guess. So we'd probably been open a little more than a year, I would guess. And I said, how much is the new bat? And she said, it's about $300. And I looked at her, and I never let her in on any of this because, we just all flow in our different gifts, right? And I said, give me a couple weeks, and I'll get him that bat. And she was like, you're kidding me. And I'm like, honey, just give me a couple weeks, and I'll get him that bat. But at that moment in time, I just didn't see a way for me to take $300 out of the account. That's how precarious it can be, depending on the risk you take, and you have to be mentally prepared to do that. How many times, Jordan? It probably cost me some sanity for sure at times. And I will say this, about probably 5-6 years into it, my wife said, you're different now. You're different since we opened the business. You're just different. And I'm like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And it was in a bad way. And I had to really kind of recheck myself and be like, okay, I can't let this just swamp me. My gosh, how many sleepless nights? But again, those are all things that, and I had a veterinarian ask me one time, she said, knowing what you know today, and this was before we did any partnership and we're still in the middle of trying to grow it and make it happen. She said, would you do it again? And I said, well, I'll answer your question with a question. I said, knowing what you know today, would you go back through vet school? And she goes, oh. I said, see, here's the good news. You don't have to. Mm-hmm. You've already done it. So I figured everything I've started since then, and I've got 3 or 4 different businesses working right now, it's a piece of cake because, first of all, I'm not leveraging a whole lot. I'm not taking on a tremendous amount of debt, and I'm not having to pay people a bunch of salaries to do it and worrying about their family and that whole thing. So it's just many times, Jordan, that you would see me, I was sitting there thinking like, next month we'll be closed, that's the reality of a lot of small business, Sometimes you're better off not being in the general manager's office and hearing the discussion. We had a good family member whose brother who produces these reality shows, and this was back when they were, pretty new then. And she was like, I can just make one phone call and he'll come do a pilot. And Donnie goes, man, we could do that. This would be so cool. I said, look, it would be really cool. I said, but that meeting we had 2 days ago with that employee? I said, that would be on film. And she goes, ooh. And I said, and our kids would be famous.
Yeah. And
how well has that worked out for anybody in the history of entertainment to have a famous kid, right? Really, can you name one? Can you think of one person who had childhood fame who's done well as an adult?
Not many.
I can't think of any. So, there's a list of them, but I would be very cautious about that. So even though that might have been something for $100,000 an episode that would have changed our lives forever, financially, it would have destroyed us spiritually and probably relationally, So those are all things that you have to weigh out. Even if it's starting the business, don't start it if your wife's not on board. Trust me.
That's good. I wanted to ask because I like to laugh after that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to business partners, spouses working together, brothers, sisters, whatever, father, sons, whatever. I think sometimes, business and family gets a bad rep, but what would you say to people that are kind of co-leading something, working together in any form? Is there any thoughts you would share on that?
Heck yeah, I would. First of all, I would say, what's the only ship that doesn't float? Do you know that one? That's a partnership. Mm-hmm. They're very difficult to maintain, very difficult. having 50-50 is a difficult business proposition. It's hard enough at 51-49. So be cautious with that and make sure, because it's even like renting property. I've had people say, I'd like to rent that property from you. I'm like, I can't rent it to you. Why not? It's because I like you. What happens if I have to evict you? I mean, we're friends, So no, I would say we had several rules, especially because we worked together. One of those rules was, and of course going back to my family plan, which we've tried to maintain, 2 annual getaways a year with my wife, just me and her, and to date my wife at least once a month. And then I changed it to twice a month, and now we, pretty much can do it anytime we want. Now we're empty nesters, but at that time in our life, it was very difficult to pull off with babysitters and everything else. But the rule of thumb was, after we started the business, we will talk about the business on the way to the restaurant, and then we will not discuss business at the restaurant. So if we're driving to the restaurant, we're blah, 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 drop her off, go park the car, sit down. Oh, by the way, and I would say, that sounds a little like business, Oh, yeah, okay. Let's talk about the kids. Let's talk about our lives. Or I would say it, and that sounds like a business thing. Yep, you're right. We'll talk about it tomorrow. So you have to, especially as a family business, be able to separate those times. You have to slot out those places that are incredibly important, because a successful business can destroy a relationship in a heartbeat. I mean, it will destroy it if you don't work on any relationship. You know that. Friendships, whatever.
You can talk briefly, but I'd love to hear even about kind of that process of, from Creature Comforts to now, like some of the things that you are working on. How did you get to some of those ideas? What does that process look like? Feel free to share in any direction with that.
Well, I'm a macro guy. The details do get me down, but you have to do the details. And I can remember many times in the business world where, Dalton or Maddie or one of my kids would be like, golly, why are you doing this? Because nobody else is going to. I mean, I got to get this done. So there's a lot of things as an entrepreneur that you have to get done. But a true visionary can have up to 20 ideas a week. I think you and I have talked about this before. And some of them are good and some of them aren't. And you don't really know. So what I try to do is keep a running list of those ideas. Something will hit me. So I use the Otter AI app. A friend turned me on to that. It's wonderful because it dictates. It dictates even my Southern language. I have to slow down and enunciate. But the more excited I get, the worse it dictates.
Yeah.
So, as a segue to that, I've got a clothing line called Southern Diction that I'm hoping to have the store live pretty soon. And it's all these pithy sayings in the South. And I've got hats, shirts, and koozies. And my office downtown is full of boxes. And I've made an investment, and I need to get a return on that. But I'm excited about that. And I've got some strategies on how I'm going to promote it and what I'm going to do. It's not a big deal if it doesn't work. I'll just have a lot of shirts and a lot of hats and a lot of koozies for a long time, and we'll give a lot of them away. But it's something that's birthed probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I started building a list. So I think one of the things that being an entrepreneur has taught me, and being just older, has taught me that delayed gratification is incredible. I mean, it is so worth the journey, I mean, the destination is worth all the trouble. And I think you had said to me the other day that we're never there. Where is there? I don't ever want to be there. I don't ever see myself being retired. I don't ever think that there won't be another thing that I'm required to do or expected to do. And that's the way I'm going to live my life. But I've also written a children's book, and I hired a young lady that she's the illustrator. She's incredibly gifted. Never hamstring an artist, whether that's marketing or whatever it is, creativity. I try to hire for that talent and let them do what they do. And then I have to change my own perceptions of what I think is good or bad, right? Because I have a picture in my mind. It's never going to be the same. I mean, let's face it, it's never going to be the same. So you have to be able to be mature enough to go, wow, that's their vision, and it's probably better than mine. I like that, so I'll let that go. So that's one thing I've done. I've written a dad book. I've got about 13 chapters of a dad book that I have not published yet, but I am still working on. I'm doing consulting, as I said before. A lot of farming. I've learned more about And I've always loved plants and all that stuff, but I'm doing more. I just planted garlic and onions and shallots and all this stuff earlier this week, and harvested my sweet potatoes. I think I was telling you earlier, but getting my greenhouse ready for the winter. I mean, so there's just several dozen things, not to mention, riding bicycles with my 3-year-old grandson who's off training wheels. I mean, he never got on them because I bought him a balance bike. Just fun stuff like that, man. Watching him learn how to balance already at that age, and just having a good time with stuff like that. So I think it's all about, it's one of the books that I read. I think it's called The Body Keeps Score. The Body Keeps the Score. Talking about how people overcome from trauma, but how the brain works. And it might not be that book, but it said that if you already play the saxophone, don't try to play the saxophone better. If you want to engage your brain, pick up the bassoon. Because if you know Spanish, try to learn Italian, which will really confuse you. Because it ignites parts of your brain that are so fresh and so new. That's how your brain grows. It's not doing the same thing better. Mm-hmm. It's doing something completely new. Mm-hmm. And I can feel that,
Yeah, and it even just sounds like with some entrepreneurial ideas, because just like your hands need to be moving, as mine are as well, and all of us. But it's
literally.
Yeah, but it's like you're also just enjoying life, and I feel like that is a great thing to feel and see, and like that's well deserved after all these years of work and planning and building. And so I think something you said to me in your office that day that I probably thought of it every day since you said it was that good things come from long stretches of boredom. So I'd say you're not in a long stretch of boredom, but you're giving yourself more space of open, quiet, kind of, why am I not doing more space? And I think when you said that, it was like, that's where the ideas come. That's where the implementation happens sometimes, is letting yourself breathe in that space.
Yeah, exactly. You probably were in that church service way back when, but I turned up all the noise in the children's area, and I turned on like some kind of static and had somebody beating some cymbals and all this stuff. And I pulled out a $5 bill, and all y'all were sitting out there. And I said, whoever can understand what I'm saying gets this $5. And it took probably several minutes. And what? Nobody could hear a thing. And whoever can understand what I'm saying gets this $5. Finally, this kid just runs up. He gets it. Bam. Turn everything down. I said, see, that's the way that God works. He's not going to rush into all of your busyness. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when you're doing a podcast, listening to it, you're growing yourself, but I had a real graphic moment of that when I was doing some maintenance work at Creature Comforts. I was out in the shop fixing something, listening to a sermon. How bad can that be? And one of our team members at the time, she had a little boy who's not a little boy anymore, little blonde-headed little kid, and he came out there. And I had my headphones in, and I've got my hand, and I was just like, hey, oh yeah, I'm working, man. Okay, good, And then he just kind of hung out, and I was like, hey, so I'm trying to get this done. And man, it was like the Lord just said, what are you doing? What do you think I did when I was hanging a door in a house when I was 27? Mm-hmm. What do you think I did? I put my hammer down and I played with that kid. And I just set everything down, and I looked at him and I said, hey man, have you ever used a drill before? He was like 4 or 5. He was like, no. I said, well, come here, man. Let's do some stuff. So we did all that. And then I saw him looking at my 4-wheeler in the back of the shop. And I said, you want to ride that 4-wheeler? He said, yeah. And I was like, well, go ask your mom. And he comes running back. She said we could, so he and I are, running around on the property. But that was just one of those moments where, again, the busyness of life can steal the blessing of a moment, where he probably has no memory of that. But I promise it's in his brain somewhere. That, one guy took the time to spend some time with him, and she was a single mom, and, just one of those moments. I was like, wow, you can be doing a lot of good things and miss out on the best, man. Romans 12:1-2, talks about the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. I believe those are 3 separate things. I believe the perfect will of God is incredibly difficult to attain. And the number one enemy I face every day, brother, is myself. There is no outside force. Being a believer, I am my biggest obstacle. And it's my disobedience and my selfishness that keeps me from attaining the perfect will of God. And perfect is translated mature. It's not perfection, but it's just maturity, So that all just comes from making a lot of mistakes.
It's like James chapter 1. It comes from those trials and the endurance
That's right.
and building the strength. And
That's right.
that's a great picture with the word perfect, because I've always read into that. But I think mature is a place where we're all trying to get to.
James 1 is one of my favorite chapters, man. It's incredible.
I echo what you said about you being your own, worst enemy at times, for lack of better words. I'm there too. And I think it's, as driven as we are, as, you're wanting to push, you're having all these ideas, you get in these states of flowing, and it's like, some of those are healthy and some aren't. And it's like,
That's
well,
right.
Am I pushing this because it needs to be pushed, or am I pushing it because my ego wants to push it, or I need to prove something, or and so I'm working through a lot of that too. But I think even just looking into, I love everything you said, but even looking into, like, you said that the girl that you were meeting with, she just has everything ahead of her. And I think thinking back to when I was at that moment of like, I just want to like have a side hustle. And it's like every step you just feel like you're brand new, and you're just like, I'm lost again. You just think you're going to reach this place where I've arrived and I've figured out business or whatever. And I think it's just constantly that you reach the next tier, and then like you guys were on this tier, and then you kind of jump off the tier and you're almost new again. And it's kind of,
I'm totally new, because I told people in the last week or two, I said, I am the dumbest person at this table. I have no idea what I'm doing, and this is exactly where I need to be. And I've told my kids that forever. If you're not putting yourself in extreme places of uneasiness, of discomfort, whether that's to discipline yourself and be transparent about what you're struggling with in your life, or in a business environment, where you're sitting around going, wow, these people are smart, man. I don't even know what they're saying, and I've gotten some emails like that in the last few weeks. And the cool thing was that one of the guys that I look up to, he goes, man, can you explain that email to me? Because I didn't get any of that. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness, man. I mean, because I'm clueless. I'll break it down as much as I can, but it's about a real estate transaction, and I'm like, wow, I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's pretty cool, So when you can answer every question that comes into your office, man, you need to really think about the divine discomfort involved with making a change. And that's where I was when I spent the 13 years with the corporation. I mean, I chased it all down. I did what I wanted to do. I mean, you walk in my office, I've got an answer. If you got an answer for every question that comes through your door, man, that is boredom, and that leads to some bad places, man, and a lot of regret. I mean, I heard when I was a little kid, somebody said it, the most unwritten songs and unwritten poems and unfulfilled dreams are in the cemetery, and wow, every time I drive by one, I think of that. Like, how many people, didn't take that chance, didn't reach out to that person they liked, didn't, Ebenezer Scrooge, the whole thing, he let the woman he loved get away for money. I mean, there's just a lot of potential in everybody's life. And I think it's our job to try to help people see that and encourage them,
So good. I couldn't have said it any better. I'm paying you a compliment now, not to get brownie points, but the podcast you sent me is your favorite podcast ever that you've listened to 30 times.
Probably, at least.
Not because this is my podcast, but what all you've said is 10 times better than that podcast. I'm serious. I'll rival it.
Gosh.
I'll put the link down there, but like, I've listened to that one. This is like just super solid, lots of wisdom, and even just adding in the spiritual faith side. I think there's a lot here that I'm probably going to have to re-listen, not for my voice, because you made this really easy just to get to sit here and listen. So,
well, I appreciate it. I mean, I don't even know what to say, but thank you.
Seriously.
I mean,
I'm serious. I don't just say that.
Yeah, I mean, my journey is never going to be over until he's done with me. I've always told my wife I'm invincible until he's finished with me, and I feel that way in everything I do. I still ride motorcycles, and yet I fear that. I've ridden since I was 4 years old. I mountain bike all the time, and I mountain climb, and I just do all these crazy things that maybe a 53-year-old's not supposed to do, and there's times I'm like, I'm just going to sell the bike, and I'm like, is that fear or is that God? Those are tough things, and they're hard. They're hard to reconcile with. But I'll tell Donna, and if I went on a motorcycle ride last night, it was so nice, and she said, she'll always say, like, be careful, and I'll say, hey, I will do my part. I'll do the best I can do on there myself. But I figure I'm invincible till he's finished with me. That doesn't mean I'm going to jump off the cliff without a parachute, you know. But, yeah, those are all good things. But I promise you, Jordan, nothing that's said today I didn't read or hear about or anything. And I know we've kind of gone over, but that Brian Buffini podcast, I think about my grandfather, because in that podcast he talks about the people that we don't know. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to know Ed Powell, right, and appreciate who he was, but what about Ed's dad's dad's dad? Probably don't know his name, but somebody somewhere toiled and labored for you to be sitting here today in Greenville, South Carolina, with what an opportunity you've created for yourself and what potential you've taken advantage of. Imagine, that's what Brian Buffini said, imagine what they would do with your potential. And it really impacted me, because I thought, man, my grandfather worked in the coal mines when he was 10 years old. I mean, there were no laws against that. He hoboed from 13 to 16. He worked for the CC camps and built bridges and roads, and he got $30 a month and sent $25 to his mom, who, you know, his dad died when he was 3 years old in the coal mines. I mean, you know, just the whole story of their lives is so much more extreme than ours. And I thank God for his ability to survive and to persevere and not quit. You know, go through World War II and get shot. You know, I mean, the guy lived a crazy life, and I'm sitting here because he refused to quit. You know, I could get into a lot of that, but that's who we need to be mindful of, is what would our dad's dad, our mom's mom, you know, what would they think of our opportunity, and what are we doing with the opportunities we've been given? I mean, that's a powerful podcast, bro.
I don't think we could make it any better than that. But thank you, Craig, for being on the podcast. And thank you all for listening. As always, we have a lot of links in the show notes below, links to our website, links to things that Craig or I mentioned throughout the podcast, so you can go and find them. But thank you for listening, and thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me. Enjoyed it.
With the digital world, everyone is on the rat wheel trying to climb their way to the top. As a photographer, I found myself at shoots trying to create content for Instagram stories. It's sad to say, but I was more focused on the stories than I was on my actual shooting. This kind of sparked me to go down the road of saying, how does a person engage on social media while still being willing to prioritize their health and growth as a person and an organization? As your coach, I simply want to present a different way of thinking about social media, marketing, and growth. I want business owners and leaders to believe they can and will grow their business off social media. If you or your brand aren't original and true in person, it doesn't matter who you portray yourself to be on social media. As people are finding us or our products online, are we building equity with them so they'll be around when our ads aren't? You can have people's attention, network in person, and capture the essence of your brand in real life before ever having the pressure to present it online. Your product and your brand and who you are as a company has to be established offline. Oftentimes, what can give you the edge is operating with a different mindset than your competition. This is a tough question to answer, but if social media changes tomorrow, where will your business actually be?